I want a divorce. I can't take it anymore. At my words, James showed a look of surprise. For a wife to say such a thing to him was intolerable, and his expression slowly turned to one of anger. Being the CEO of a company, he has a lot of pride. Yet he lacked responsibility and the ability to reflect on his actions. His attitude negatively impacted both our home and his company.
Fine, but you're raising all 4 kids on your own. I won't be paying child support or any other bills.
Scoffing, James looked down on me, showing no sign that he thought his words were irresponsible. Even though 2 of those kids were from his previous marriage. But it doesn't matter if they're biologically mine or not. All 4 of them are my precious children. All right. No matter how hard it might be, I was determined to raise them myself. After we divorced and moved to our new place, James suddenly showed up.
Why did this happen to me?
Watching James in his distraught state, I couldn't help but silently laugh. Finally realizing, Enjoy, I thought. From now on, you're going to reap what you've sown. My name is Lydia, 34 years old. I'm a stay-at-home mom in a bustling household with my husband and 4 kids. Our children are eldest son Michael, 15, eldest daughter Sophia, 14, second son Jack, 8, and younger daughter Ava, 6. They're growing up fast, eating well, playing a lot, and thriving. Sure, they argue from time to time, but they get along great, and our home is always filled with laughter. James, who's now 39, is the CEO of a manufacturing company, and we remarried 9 years ago. Actually, Michael and Sophia are from his previous marriage, they're his stepchildren. His previous wife passed away 12 years ago. James had a good fortune to be greatly favored by Mr. Wilson, a major shareholder in his company. I've never met him. But he has been mentoring James, introducing him to business contacts and so on. Their friendship began when they met at a bar. Back then, James had just remarried me and was looking to expand his business. Learning of James's ambitions, Mr. Wilson bought shares in his company, enabling James to grow it further. Life is truly unpredictable. Ever since, Mr. Wilson has been a great support to James and his company. I met James when I worked as a receptionist at one of his business associates. My first impression of him was, what a refreshing CEO. He had a lovely smile and always made it a point to greet the receptionists with a "Take care" as he left. Looking back, that was when I found James most attractive and likable. James began to change after our marriage, as his company started to grow. He became arrogant and began taking people for granted. This was evident both at home, with me doing all the household chores, and at his workplace with his employees. Stay-at-home moms have it easy, huh? You probably can nap in the afternoon, right? Excuse me? Preparing meals for 6, packing lunches for the kids, doing laundry twice a day, cleaning, shopping. Where in the world does he think I have any downtime? On top of that, James never helps around the house. Sophia is prepping for high school entrance exams, and Ava, being 6, still needs a lot of assistance. Michael comes home late from soccer practice every day, and Jack often asks for help with his homework. I wish James, being the father, would lend a hand. It sure would make things easier. I've told him several times that just bringing money home doesn't make you a father. What are you talking about? I'm exhausted from work, you know? That's why I'm providing enough money for the household, right? Just a little effort would help. Like helping Michael with his homework, or advising Sophia about her college applications. When I get home, Michael's already asleep, isn't he? And as for Sophia, she'd probably find it easier to talk to her mother than her father. Fulfill your responsibilities as a mother, okay?
You're the one not fulfilling your duties as a father.
I slammed the table in frustration. He spends his nights out drinking, and on his days off, he's playing golf. He can't blame work for coming home late, and he's not home on weekends because he's out having fun.
Why don't you work then? I can stay at home if you want. But make sure you bring in the same amount of money. If you can't, then don't act so high and mighty.
And yet, he always blames everyone else. Lately, even the kids have started to avoid him and don't even attempt to make conversation. But James probably hasn't even noticed, and I doubt he feels lonely. It felt like he couldn't care less about the family and the kids. And if you thought he'd be more committed to his job in return, that didn't seem to be the case either. Every evening, he'd just rant about his employees.
Seriously, there's a lot of incompetent people these days.
To which I responded, "Don't say things like that.
If there really are that many people struggling, why not provide additional training or change the way you mentor them?"
Huh? James scowled deeply, shaking his head as if to say I didn't understand.
Training costs both money and time. I can't spend resources on those who can't do their jobs. But in the long run, that investment will pay off for the company.
After all, it's the people who keep the company running. I couldn't believe that a company that didn't value its workers could ever truly succeed.
And also, I put the expansion project in the hands of the department head, and it ended up failing. So I demoted him.
At James' words, I blurted out, "What?" In disbelief, I looked back at James' face.
"That was your idea, wasn't it? You're the one who said the new project would definitely succeed." "Ugh, stop it. He's the head of that department, not me." "Regardless, you agreed to it, and it's not solely his fault, right? Every decision in the company is your responsibility as the CEO. That's what being a CEO is about. Don't act like you know about running a business when you don't."
He'd always get defensive, refusing to listen to anyone's opinion or reflect on his actions. And eventually, even Mr. Wilson started to caution him.
"Why is even Mr. Wilson on my case now? I haven't done anything wrong. It's all because of these incompetent people."
Apparently, he had requested Mr. Wilson for additional funding by issuing new shares, but he was turned down. I heard he was told that the company could go under at this rate. It makes sense. Mr. Wilson isn't investing just for fun. No matter how fond he is of James, he's not going to blindly fund reckless ventures. James needs to reflect on his actions and rethink his management style, but he stopped listening to both me and Mr. Wilson.
"Mom, look at this."
One day, after returning from high school, Michael handed me his smartphone. On the screen was a video of James entering a hotel with a young woman, their arms linked together.
"I was coming home from practice and saw Dad walking with this young lady. I followed and..."
I was so filled with rage that tears began to flow. He fails in his responsibilities to the company, as a father and as a husband. What a pitiful man. I knew it wasn't right to cry in front of my son, but the tears wouldn't stop. Michael kept patting my back in an attempt to comfort me.
"I'm sorry, Michael. I might divorce your father." "That's fine, Mom. It's your decision. But what about Sophia and me?"
I looked up, realizing Michael, who had grown taller than me, was genuinely concerned.
"Silly boy."
I stretched on my toes, ruffling Michael's hair.
"If you guys are okay with it, of course, you'll live with me."
Looking down at me, Michael smiled happily.
"We might have some financial troubles, but..."
As I wiped away my tears, Michael interrupted.
"That's okay. We'll manage." "Why do you think so?"
"Because I know you won't abandon us." With a certain confidence, Michael smiled. Immediately, I hired a private investigator to gather evidence. It turned out the woman was an employee at James' company, and the two of them had been seen entering hotels multiple times. A week passed, and I told the kids about my decision to divorce James. By that time, I had made up my mind, intending to get custody of the kids if they wished to live with me. James came home late again that night, without a hint of guilt. As he cheerfully began to remove his tie, I showed him the photos Michael had sent me.
"I can't bear it anymore. We're getting a divorce."
I laid out the evidence photos, and James looked shocked. Slowly, his expression turned to one of anger. I guessed his pride wouldn't let him accept being confronted this way by me. He scoffed.
"Fine. You raised the 4 kids. Don't expect any child support or alimony."
With a dismissive laugh, James made it clear he felt no responsibility. But that was already my intention. No matter the hardships, I had decided to raise the kids myself. "Okay." I looked straight into James' eyes and nodded. I'd work as hard as needed for the kids. They'd be far better off with me than with such a man. The next day.
"Mom, there's someone I want to introduce you to."
While I was tidying up the house, Michael and Sophia came home with an elderly man. He seemed to be about 70, introducing himself with a gentle smile.
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Lydia. My name is Wilson."
"Wait, Mr. Wilson, as in?"
"Yes, the major shareholder of James' company."
"I appreciate all you've done for us." I puzzled by this unexpected introduction. why would Michael and Sophia bring Mr. Wilson home? Did they know him? Noticing my confusion, Sophia chuckled softly. Looking at me, she revealed.
Actually, he's our grandfather.
What? All three of them laughed at my stunned reaction.
So, let me explain.
Mr. Wilson began.
I am the father of James' first wife. I divorced when my daughter was very young. I've always been focused on my work.
Mr. Wilson had consistently paid child support even after his divorce. However, he never met or communicated with his daughter directly. He was completely dedicated to his job and didn't remarry. But after retiring and having some downtime, he began to wonder about his daughter. He wanted to see if his grown-up daughter, whom he knew nothing about, was leading a happy life. When he hired a detective to find out about her, he learned that both his daughter and her mother had passed away. Yet, Mr. Wilson found out about his grandchildren and that they were now being raised by his daughter's husband, James. He thought of introducing himself and offering support if James was raising them alone. However, it was right around the time James and I got remarried.
That's why I hid the fact that I was his first wife's father when I approached James at the bar. I learned that he was having financial troubles with the company, so I offered to help.
Mr. Wilson explained.
So meeting in the bar wasn't by chance.
Exactly. He replied. Apparently, about 3 years ago, he approached Michael and Sophia on their way home from school and told them he was their grandfather. Since then, they had been in touch quite often.
Michael told me about your divorce. At first, I was thinking of just offering some financial assistance.
He trailed off, gazing at me thoughtfully.
Michael also told me about James having an affair with an employee and what he says about them at home. And how you've responded to all of it.
He probably learned about James blaming and speaking ill of his employees.
I've been aware of the complaints against James from his staff for some time now. I hoped he'd come around, but I've been pretty disappointed in him.
Hearing your employees being badmouthed, especially regarding an affair with one of them, is quite unsettling. Especially blaming your subordinates for your own mistakes, that's not what a leader does. Mr. Wilson himself had run a business. He certainly had a strict perspective on what's expected of a company's president.
That said, Lydia, I have a request for you.
He said, looking serious. It took about a month to get everything set up. After the divorce, Mr. Wilson helped us purchase an apartment. It's a spacious place with 4 bedrooms, enough for the kids to live comfortably. Thanks to Mr. Wilson covering the down payment, I felt incredibly grateful.
I can't thank you enough for all you've done.
No worries, Lydia. You're gonna have to work hard from here on out. Mr. Wilson said with a warm smile. The kids were really helpful with the move, making the transition smooth. A few days later, in the middle of the day, the doorbell rang persistently. It kept ringing incessantly, and then there was loud, urgent knocking on the door. Checking the security camera, even though it's a secured apartment building, I saw James right at the entrance.
How do you know where I live?
How did you get in?
I hired a detective and found out. Open the door!
Excuse me?
I'm not letting you in.
The moment I turned off the monitor, the knocking intensified.
Please, open up!
I reluctantly opened the door to avoid disturbing the neighbors, but had no intention of letting him in further.
So, what do you want?
Standing firmly at the doorway, I crossed my arms and looked at James.
There's a shareholder meeting coming up. You still have shares in my company, right?
Yes, I do. So?
They're discussing my removal as CEO.
Of course, I knew. I had received the meeting notice detailing the agenda. James, losing his composure, pleaded.
Oppose it for me.
I wondered what was going through his mind. Was he desperately approaching each shareholder like this?
I can't get in touch with Mr. Wilson.
James was frantic in front of me.
Is even Mr. Wilson trying to remove me? Why am I facing this?
Inside, I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the distressed James. Did he finally realize? If he thought he could still get help after ignoring all of Mr. Wilson's advice, he was really naive. Holding back my laughter, I responded with an indifferent face.
Who knows? But my answer is clear. I'm in favor of your removal.
Seeing James' face filled with despair, I told him to leave.
Also, just a piece of advice. No one would want a CEO who abandons work to do this kind of thing in the middle of the day.
I thought to myself, this will be interesting. From now on, you'll be facing the consequences of all your past actions. On the day of the shareholder meeting, James appeared at the venue with dark circles under his eyes, looking weary. I greeted Mr. Wilson, but Mr. Wilson only returned the nod with a stern face. The moderator started the meeting, and the proceedings got underway. The shareholders were abuzz with the news of James' potential dismissal. Some even called for James' immediate removal, but Mr. Wilson opposed it. We need him to understand why this is happening. James, looking at Mr. Wilson, was on the brink of tears. He couldn't fathom why someone who had always been kind to him would say such things. The reasons for the dismissal. Mr. Wilson began reading from documents detailing James' misdemeanors. Based on complaints from employees, researched over a month, reports, and testimonials. We have recorded audio, and some incidents are on security footage.
You're so incompetent. Is that why the performance is bad?
James' recorded outbursts echoed in the hall. The content was unbearable, even denying the personalities of the other party. On the large screen, a video showed James hitting an older male employee's head with a bundle of papers. The shareholders frowned. It wasn't just bad-mouthing his employees at home, James had been abusive at the company. This was his comeuppance for becoming arrogant, thinking he was favored, and not heeding Mr. Wilson's warnings.
It's not true. They kept bringing up requests and opinions without showing results.
James stood up, desperately trying to defend himself. Yet, as expected, voices criticized. Did you really need to go that far? Striking with a bundle of papers.
But the current audio and footage are malicious. Yes, I was framed.
James claimed it was odd that the voice recordings didn't capture what was said before he began shouting. He asserted in front of everyone that they selectively reported only the parts that favored their argument.
Even in the footage, there's no sound. You don't know what sort of rude things that employee said to me, do you?
No one was inclined to take James' side at face value. However, some did voice that if they were going to dismiss him, they wanted to ensure everything was done fairly. Looking at a slightly relieved James, Mr. Wilson and I exchanged glances. The more James resisted, the more evidence we'd present. James seemed unaware he was digging his own grave. Let's hear from him then. The former head of the planning division spoke. After the new venture that the CEO wanted failed, I was demoted. Even though he had followed every directive, he was made responsible when things went south.
That's not true. You failed, not me. Don't put this on me.
In response to James' rebuttal, the former head repeatedly stated, I simply followed instructions. Clenching his fist in frustration. When I looked back in surprise, all eyes were on me. Lydia is the former wife of our CEO. Could you repeat here what you told him? Prompted by Mr. Wilson, I stood up. Yes. The CEO is responsible for everything in the company. That's what being a CEO means. Mr. Wilson nodded. I feel the same way. And many shareholders nodded in agreement.
Wait. I may have demoted him, but I didn't fire him. The company, meaning me, bore the losses. Just for that, do I deserve to be dismissed?
James didn't show a hint of remorse. That was the main issue, but it seemed James hadn't learned. Mr. Wilson interjected. There's more. James exclaimed.
There's more?
Yes, there's more. Then, on the screen, a picture was displayed showing James entering a hotel with a female employee.
What?
James, in shock, lunged at me. Several shareholders restrained him.
Lydia! You showed this to Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Wilson promptly responded. No, she didn't. James quickly responded to Mr. Wilson with a puzzled.
Huh? But, other than Lydia, who could it be?
This was taken by my grandson, Michael.
What did you say? Grandson? Michael?
James was shocked, raising his voice in disbelief. Mr. Wilson smiled and nodded. If I tell you Michael and Sophia are my grandchildren, would you understand? James's eyes widened, and he sank to his knees. So all this while, the one who's been supporting me was... Because my daughter was in your care and you were raising my grandchildren. I believed in you, but you've changed. Just because I told Lydia to raise those kids, my life's over? It's because of your true character. James crouched on the floor, clutching his head, and began to sob. Now, everyone, the woman in the photo that caused the CEO's divorce is an employee of our company. This means the CEO made advances on an employee while he was still married. With his forehead still on the floor, James kept muttering.
Stop it, please stop.
Do you think he's still fit to be the CEO? With Mr. Wilson's words, the unanimous decision was made to dismiss James. After James was let go, I took on the role of CEO. Mr. Wilson valued the suggestions I had made earlier, like training for those who can't keep up with the work and trying different mentoring techniques. He wanted to see me in a leadership role. Some other shareholders also took a liking to me, and with the help of the employees, I've been working hard as CEO. James and the woman he cheated with found it too awkward to stay and left the company. I demanded compensation, so James had to sell his house. Apparently, after being forced to leave the company and the revelation to her parents, the woman broke up with him, hurling insults. As for us, we're living happily as a family of 5 in an apartment. On days I work late, Mr. Wilson comes over to watch the kids. Jack and Ava are equally fond of him, and they love spending time with Mr. Wilson. Michael and Sophia have started preparing dinner and waiting for me. I'm grateful to Mr. Wilson and the kids and am living every day to the fullest.